let's talk about why this is really important. I would say this is the most important theory, or the most important set of concepts in the whole economics A level syllabus. And the reason for that is actually pretty simple. A couple of reasons, but the most important reason is you kind of like you split the whole syllabus into four areas, right? Basic micro, supply and demand, theory of the market; advanced micro, cost and revenue, theory of the firm; and then you've got basic macro and advanced macro, which is what we're effectively starting, right? We're starting with basic macro and then we move on to advanced macro. The thing is, unlike a micro where the basic sort of beginner theory has its own diagram and then the advanced theory has another separate diagram, cost and revenue, in this case, ADNS covers kind of all the macro. There is no like advanced macro model like the equivalent to a cost and revenue model. It is just ADNAS throughout macro. And this kind of means like the whole way you have to think of the economy on the macro level, the only way in almost is ADNAS. There are a couple of other ways, but they're not as good. So they don't ask questions on them very often and barely anyone uses them. But you are so reliant on ADAS to explain how the economy works in macro. I'll show you guys later, actually, if we have time. I picked a past paper at random. I promise you, completely random. I did not plan this earlier, and I just wanted to see how many of the 25 multiple choice questions on a macro past paper you kind of needed ADAS for. So how many out of 25? 16 out of 25 questions, right? So that's 64% of the questions were like directly related to ADAS in the multiple choice section. So if you don't know ADAS very well, you're potentially throwing away like more than half the marks in the multiple choice questions. So yeah, really, really important. And let's discuss a bit about how you actually use this, I guess, not just why it is important for you to know it, but how do you actually use this? What's the main way you want to use it? And much like you use supply and demand to sort of model a market, understand how a market works, and then make predictions about a market, you want to use ADS in the same way, just about the economy. So, like a micro, we might say, if there is a rise in the incomes, people spend more, or if there is a increase in advertising, people will want to buy more. Demand will therefore shift to the right, and price will rise, output will rise. Think about what you're doing there. You're using supply and demand to make a prediction about the market, what's going to happen to the price, what's going to happen to the quantity, and to understand and articulate how does the market work, how does one thing affect another thing, affect another thing, affect the price. We want to do exactly the same thing in macro. And again, it is very, very similar in a way. We might say something like, if generally incomes in the economy increase, let's say wages rise, for example, uh, consumption as a whole will increase. So just if everyone has more money, not just in one market, but everyone in the economy typically has more money, then we should expect total spending to rise. AD is going to shift to the right, and that's going to cause a new macro equilibrium BP and a new macro equilibrium price. And that's again, it's so clean, simple. It works exactly the same way as in micro in a sense. Because what have I done there? I've just used it to understand and articulate how the economy works and then make a prediction. If incomes in the economy rise, as like on aggregate, if most people or sufficient volume of people have higher income, total spending will rise, total demand in the economy will then rise. According to my model, my theory of how the economy works, this will increase GDP, yay, economic growth, but it's also going to increase the price level, no, inflation. So effectively, you can hopefully see just from that there's sort of a clear basis in this theory, or there's a clear sort of root of supply and demand in this theory as well. So if you're very comfortable with supply and demand, this hopefully would make a lot of sense. But okay, so I want to give you guys just a sort of a little chain link to think about. So I think, and you can do this for micro as well, but I'm just going to do it to sort of lay it out as a way for you to think about the order of change, how the order in which you might explain things in a paragraph to talk about ADA. So the first thing that you're going to get interested in is a change in some variable that affects ADAS. This is really like how you should understand change in the economy. Why does the economy change? Why does growth slow down, speed up? Why do price levels rise, fall? Because there'll be a change in some variable that affects AD or AS. And there's loads. There's absolutely loads, maybe like 35, 40 on them. There's loads. Okay. One of the most important things, and something we're not actually going to cover much today, is just making sure you know your factors in ADAS, like back of your hand. Why does AD shift right? Why does AD shift left? Why does AS shift blah, 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 blah. So there's loads and loads and loads of them. Some of them are really easy, like income tax. If income tax falls, people have more money and then they spend more. They're very, very easy. Some of them are more difficult, like interest rates, which can affect AD and AS. So we're not going to cover much of that today. Again, this is just to sort of explain the way to think about AD and AS and how to talk about it in your paragraph. So you're normally going to be starting with changing some variable that affects ADAS. This will lift you a shift of AD or AS. If you're very adventurous, again, a bit like micro, you can do double shifts in your answers, talk about shifting one and a shift in the other at the same time, but you have to be quite confident, I think, with what you're doing. Then that creates a new macroeconomic equilibrium. Here's a key that maybe isn't quite so important in micro as macro. This final step is an impact on the macro objectives. And I think this is why do I say this is a key step? Right, what is it that makes me think this is actually a really important part of what we want to do with the ADAS diagram? It's because many questions are not gonna say use ADNAS for this. They're not gonna say the best way to answer this, by the way, guys, is with ADNAS. What they might say, for example, is how will a change in savings affect economic growth in the UK? So how will a change in some macro variable affect a macro objective, in this case, economic growth? And again, because we want to think the macro objectives are impacted by changes in ADAS. That's really an ADAS question, even though it doesn't say the words ADAS in there. If you got asked how does a change in savings affect economic growth, maybe as a 9 marker, that's an ADAS question. And especially as a 9 marker, you have to use a diagram anyway, of course. But as a 15 marker, even it's an ADAS question, and that's going to be the way to hoover up the marks and the way to make sure that what you're saying sort of correlates with what theory says. So that's why you should be using ADAS for that kind of question. So I guess to simplify, because I feel like I might have overcomplicated that a little bit, but to simplify, if you are discussing a change in the macro objectives, if you're discussing what affects growth, what affects inflation, what affects unemployment, one of the easiest and best ways to think about this is through ADAS. Even if the question doesn't say so, even if the question just says, how does a change in something affect unemployment? Or even a simple 15 marker like, what are the factors in rising unemployment? That's definitely seen similar before. then the easiest way to answer that is ADS, even if the question doesn't say it. So really, really important. And you can hopefully see in the last diagram I did why, or like how this works, right? We had AD shifting to the right, and then what happened to GDP? It went up, which is economic growth, which is a macro objective. What happened to the price level? It went up, which indicates inflation, which might, depending on the level of inflation, be counter to one of the macroeconomic objectives. So again, the key thing I'm stressing here is you want to use ADAS as a way to think about how economic growth is achieved or failed to be achieved, how inflation is controlled. Like I alluded to earlier, you kind of use ADAS as your way to understand almost everything in macro.